Hello and welcome to the Providence College Podcast. I'm your host, Liz Kay, and I'm joined by producer Chris Judge of the class of 2005. Here at the Providence College Podcast, we bring you interesting stories from the Fryer family. This week, we're talking with Keri Mandell, a member of the class of 2004. In February, she raised more than $50,000 for the American Cancer Society through the World Marathon Challenge, completing 7 marathons in 7 days on 7 continents. A cancer survivor herself, she ran those 183 miles in honor of her father. Keri, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So you finished 7 marathons in 7 days in 7 locations. Let's just go through the list now. Antarctica, Cape Town, South Africa, Perth, Australia, Dubai in the United Arab Emirates, Madrid, Spain, Fortaleza on the northeastern coast of Brazil, and Miami, Florida. So there's so many questions. What was the biggest challenge? I mean, was it the jet lag, the travel? How did you sleep between races?
It was really an incredible experience. I want to say that the experience itself is some of like the best times of my life and the worst times of my life, because there was definitely lots of highs and lots of lows. It was very exciting to see many different places, but the travel certainly took a toll. I think my body felt good running throughout the 7 marathons, but eventually just the lack of sleep. And then being up and down in the airplane multiple times just kind of, definitely had an impact, and one that it's hard to train for, and one that I didn't necessarily expect. So I think that was one of the hardest pieces, just how your body responds to, air travel, really. But yeah, so it was this crazy ride. I mean, from Antarctica, where we had negative 20 degrees, to Fortaleza, Brazil, where it was, 100 degrees. So there was lots of like weather extremes, which also made it kind of challenging, but fun.
So how did you train for the event and prepare for those extremes? Because that's something you could predict.
So training really, and I kind of started training like for a year, but with the bulk of my training really within like 9 months prior. Because when you're traveling throughout the 7 continents, you're in different time zones. I think we were in like 16 different time zones. So I tried to really work out different times of the day, and I would do double workouts, and also, back-to-back workouts that were really challenging and hard. In addition to the running, I wanted to make sure that my body would hold up, and that, I wasn't injured. So I did a lot of swimming and biking to also help keep my endurance up and help prepare. And I want to say that, I was biking anywhere from 200 to 300 miles a week. I was swimming from, like 5 to 6 miles a week, and running on an average week was like 50 or 60. On some of the higher weeks, it was about 70 or 80 miles. So it was definitely very time consuming. And again, working out in the early mornings or working out late at night kind of helped with that. I also did some of my workouts like in the summer, and also in the winter. Antarctica was supposed to be similar to the winters we have here in the Northeast. So we were predicting around 32 degrees. However, that was not the case. While I was actually down in we met in South Africa to, oh goodness, what's the word I'm looking for? We had just to kind of get situated and check in right before the race, and we took off. And they were, people were messaging me. They're like, "Oh my God, it looks like Antarctica is having some of the highest temperatures, we've ever seen, and it's beautiful. Like, you're gonna have a great run." And I was like, "Not in the part of Antarctica we were." In fact, it was way, much colder than we expected, with 50 to 60 mile per hour gale force winds. So even though I was expecting the cold, I was grateful that I had packed some extra gear to really be able to withhold and withstand the cold weather. It's just like that level.
And I'm just curious, people plan so much for winter running in the first place. Mm-hmm. Like what did you have to wear, and how did you prepare for that conditions in Antarctica?
So I definitely made several trips to REI. That was my go-to store. Let's see, I had a base layer of pants. And then I had 2 pairs of pants on, and then I had windbreaker on top of that. And that really helped prevent, kind of help keep me warm, and help block the wind a little bit. On my toes, I wore 2 pairs of socks. So I had those toe socks that I wore in dingy toe socks. And then I had another pair of socks on top of that. And I wore Gore-Tex trail running shoes that were waterproof. So those were really helpful. And that was like a last minute pickup. I wasn't necessarily planning on wearing those. And, like the day before I left for South Africa, I, had gone to REI and just got some like last minute things. And that was one of the things that I'd switched to, which I'm grateful for, because my feet would have been soaked. On upper layer, I had some short sleeve base layer, long sleeve base layer, 2 long sleeve base layers. And then I had a wind jacket. And on my head, I wore about three hats and special sunglasses because you have to be really mindful of the glare in Antarctica with the sun and the snow. So I wish I had goggles. That was probably a mistake that I made. But I wasn't expecting them to get that cold. So I was grateful to have something blocking my face. And I also had, a windproof scarf that I had, and I kind of had my mouth in. So yeah, it was cold though. I mean, and there was no stopping for fuel. There was no stopping to really use the bathroom. You were out there until you were done. And there was no way of really warming up until you were finished and got back into, the lodge that they had.
Oh my gosh. I mean, just even the weight of those layers alone sounds like a challenge,
Yeah.
period. So, which was your favorite race and which was the hardest?
So I would have, my favorite race was definitely Australia. Australia was beautiful, and it was the third race after Antarctica. And usually this challenge starts in Antarctica. It has the most unpredictable weather, but this year the race kept getting delayed, delayed, delayed. And when we finally decided we were going to start in Antarctica, we were so kind of delayed that the race director decided to start us in South Africa. So we actually went South Africa to Antarctica and then to Australia. So Australia was probably the one race that was everyone felt really good because they were grateful that to be out of Antarctica. Um, Anything would have been better than that. And we had the longest amount of recovery. So we had an 18-hour flight, trip from there from point to point. So it was really kind of nice. We were able to kind of relax a little bit, get to eat a little bit, get to sleep a little bit before running again. So I would say Australia was the one that I felt probably the best. And it was beautiful. The weather was nice. We ran at night, so it wasn't too hot. It was very comfortable. So I would say that. And I would say, before doing Fortaleza, my answer would have been Antarctica was probably the worst. I remember finishing up the race and I literally cried. And I said, that was the hardest thing I've ever done. Like it took a lot of grit to get through that. My mantra was like, Antarctica, you will not break me, because it did break some people. Not everybody finished. But I didn't come that far to only get that far, and stop in Antarctica. I did end up with frostbite on two toes and a finger, which was hard. But going from that extreme cold where we were negative 20 degrees with 50 to 60 per mile gale force winds and snow, up to my knees, what we were trudging through was really challenging. But then on the flip side, we were in Fortaleza. The race started at noon. So it was hot, middle of the day. There was no cloud cover. It was close to 100 degrees with 100% humidity. It was brutal. I didn't, you just couldn't drink enough. You couldn't stay hydrated. And that was pretty bad. So I'm not sure. Looking back now, I'd probably take the cold over the hot. So I think Fortaleza would be one that I wouldn't be as anxious to do again. But but yeah.
So you can always put on more gear, you can always put on more
Yeah.
layers, but you can't get away from the heat, can you?
No, you cannot.
You ran this event in honor of your father. Can you tell us how
Yeah.
he inspired you to make it to the end?
Yeah, my dad was a pretty amazing man, and he was an entrepreneur at heart, and I kind of followed in his footsteps a little bit, knowing being a business owner myself, and he always taught me to kind of shoot for the stars and live my dreams and be the best that I could be. So it was really, he's always been there as one of my cheerleaders and everything, throughout life, encouraging me. And having lost him and my stepmom, he passed away of multiple myeloma and she passed away of lung cancer. Um, it was really hard. And I think that, raising money and funds for cancer is something that I'm really passionate about and something that I enjoy doing, and helping folks who are currently in treatment, things like that. So, with my dad being sick and watching him, I decided that I was going to continue to do whatever I could to raise funds, to raise awareness, to help, and to honor my dad and who he was, the person and the incredible man that he was. So I like to pick these challenges and do that as part of, my fundraising efforts for the American Cancer Society. And, with my dad always kind of in the back of my mind there, cheering me on.
Well, you certainly have picked on quite a number of challenges. I mean, yes, you did this in February, the World Marathon Challenge, but you ran your first marathon in 2014, and then in total you've run 15 marathons and 3 ultra marathons, a full Ironman, and 6 70.3-mile races. So, were you always into fitness? How did you get started?
So that's a great question. So I actually wasn't. I never considered myself to be much of an athlete. I was not into fitness growing up. I was a dancing school dropout. I tried jazz and tap. I tried tennis and basketball. I played a little bit of softball as a kid. It was the one sport I really enjoyed. But I really didn't get into fitness until much later in life. About 11 years ago, they had discovered cancerous cells in my cervix that I needed to remove. And as a result of that, I was able to have kids. And that was really a challenging time for me. And during that time in my life, a friend of mine was like, brought me to my first yoga class. And yoga really helped me and taught me a lot about who I was and how strong I was, and taught me to love and appreciate my body. And from there, I kind of started to think about, well, rather than focusing on what my body couldn't do or focusing on things that, my limitations in a sense, what could it do? So from there, I started getting really into fitness, and I started trying to find those limiting beliefs that I had about myself. For example, running. Like after graduating from Providence College, I went up to Boston, got my master's in education, stayed there, worked, met my husband. I would always watch the Boston Marathon, and I would, it was amazing that these people were running. I never thought that I would be one of them. And, I was like, why can't I be one of them? So from there, just kind of started that I wanted to try. I started running. And once I completed, my first marathon, it became like, well, what can I do next? And next and next. So I'm always looking for these like adventures and these physical feats and ways that I can challenge myself. My favorite quote is life begins at the end of your comfort zone. So I look for things every day that challenge me, and I like to find my edge and tiptoe beyond that. So for me, within the last, you know, 6 years since I started running, it's just been kind of see where I can go and where the world, where my life takes me.
So you mentioned you majored in education at PC and you worked as an educator for many years, but now you own your own yoga studio in New
Correct.
Jersey. So can you tell us about that transition?
So yeah, so I graduated with elementary and special education, got a master's in special ed, and then I even went on to pursue a CAG, Certificate of Advanced Graduate Studies in Administration. Worked as an administrator in Boston for a little while, in a behavior program in Brookline Public Schools. And I really, enjoyed being in education. We ended up moving back to New Jersey 8 years ago, when my dad was diagnosed and he became ill. And I started working as a learning consultant there. And after a little while, I just kind of became a little disenchanted with public education. And even as administrator, just I wanted more. And fitness had become at that point such a large, part of my life. And for me, yoga was so huge. When I moved to New Jersey, I got certified as a yoga teacher and continued to pursue, continuing education in yoga. And I just loved it so much. And it was just about, I wanted to teach yoga. I wanted to give back, because it did so much for me. So I wanted to help make a difference and help other folks who might be struggling as well. So I thought about leaving my career in education. And I, originally thought about, managing a studio. But as it turned out, I decided that I was going to open one. We're in Central Jersey. We are the premier hot power yoga studio. There's nothing in Central Jersey that offers hot power. And having moved from Boston, is where I started. My love for yoga had developed, and it was at a hot studio. So when I moved to Jersey and there wasn't one, I decided, well, hey, maybe I'll develop one. And that's kind of what I did. And from there, we've been open for over 3 years. I developed a yoga school, so now I get to teach other folks how to become yoga teachers. And for me, it was just kind of a natural progression. I'd gone to school for education and teaching, and I kind of did that. Just it looked a little different now.
The pandemic we're currently in has impacted so many business owners and so many people. It's just such a global impact. How have things been working for you? You're back? Your studio's back open?
We are back open. We opened last week. So no, it was certainly a challenge, and I think it's really hard when you work so hard. You have this community, and it's amazing, and then all of a sudden someone's like taken away from you in a sense. But I think what's important and what this has taught us to learn and to adapt and to adjust. So we kept our community going. We offered a lot of online classes during the interim, and it was really great to see that even where we weren't physically together, that it was nice to see everybody online and taking classes. So now that we are open, fortunately, listening to certain guidelines, we're not open at full capacity. We're at 25% capacity. We're following all the guidelines that the state outlines, but we have open for group classes. However, we still also offer live classes online, live stream classes. We have some on-demand classes, and we have some outdoor yoga classes as well. So we're trying to support everybody where they are. If they're comfortable coming in, come on in. If not, we get that too. So it's been kind of cool to see how things adjusted. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And as long as the weather holds out for at least a couple more months, hopefully we'll have an Indian summer and keep going with outdoor yoga. I wondered if there was any professor or experience at your time at PC that kind of carried through with you, in terms of some of the challenges you faced and, your work as an educator and your transition. There are any experiences that kind of stand out in your mind as helping shape you?
It's funny. I think one of the biggest things, it wasn't. I want to say Father Folsey and some of the theology classes that I took were really impactful. I want to say one of my favorite memories about PC was Sunday Mass at night. We used to always there was a live band and the music was always beautiful. And not really been, I didn't really grow up with a religious background. My mom was Catholic, my dad was Protestant, but I had never really gone to church. And for some reason, when I pursued colleges, I looked for all Catholic schools, and PC was just like, I don't know. I just needed to be there. Like the minute I walked on campus, I was like, I knew that was where I wanted to be, and it was calling to me. And during that time, I think the theology and learning about that was just certainly had a major impact in my life. And Father Folsey was one of my first professors, and he taught me a lot, and kind of found that little bit more spirituality of myself too, which was really incredible.
You mentioned every day trying to challenge yourself and push that edge, and I wondered if you could give us some examples of ways that you've sort of challenges you've attempted and kind of how you pushed yourself mentally through them. Because I mean, yes, 7 marathons in 7 days is huge, but how do you do that on a day-to-day basis? Especially at a time now when we're so limited in what we can do.
Yeah. So it could be, when you think about challenging yourself, it could be anything, as small as just like having a difficult conversation that you're not ready to have, or that you're afraid to have, or, whether that's with yourself or someone else. Or it doesn't have to be as extreme as, running in Antarctica. But I mean, for me, I try to do things like, I just took up trail running. I was afraid of trails. I don't like running on rocks. It's kind of a little intimidating and scary. So last week I did my first trail run. So I, like physically things like that, and, I do. And sometimes, when I don't want to get up and I don't want to do a workout, or if it's hard, remind myself that I'll be happier when it's done, and just kind of stepping the foot out the door and going one foot in front of the other. So things like that. It's attempting new things, trying to talking more. I spend a lot of time. I enjoy being in front of people and I enjoy talking, but certainly I did a couple of public speaking. I did some public speaking prior to everything being closed down, and that was really hard and scary for me actually too. Talking in front of like large groups of people in public, which is kind of funny because I'm a teacher and I stand up in front of people all the time. But, even teaching scares me a little bit every day. I get like the butterflies and nerves, and it's overcoming those fears or little trepidation that you have. And so things like that, I think. Anything, if something says in my mind, like, no, that's not a great idea, or that's scary or whatever, and I'm like, oh, now I know I have to do it. So if it's attempting a new yoga pose or a new arm balance, or, whatever it is, it could be anything really.
So that's your gauge when something is the right choices. It gives you those
I'm like,
that sinking feeling.
It's like if it sounds like a bad idea, I'm like, oh, let's do it.
I had heard about your daily mantra, which I feel like could be very applicable to people today, just trying to get through the monotony in some cases, and the fear for many people who are either frontline workers, whether in a grocery store or in a medical capacity. Could you tell us about that and how it's helped you?
So my daily mantra, one of the things I was saying to myself, it's a great day to be alive. Is that what you're referring to? Yeah. That was one of the biggest things that, especially a few years ago, I wrote on a Post-it note and I kept it on my mirror. Having, when I got sick initially, I was very depressed, and there were times where I hit some pretty low lows, and there were scary times where I wasn't sure how, if I could do it, if I could continue on, if I had this idea of what I wanted my life to be. And if I didn't, was it going to work out for me? Then I'm like, well, why bother? So I had a lot of things were going on. And and when I started to turn that around and with going to yoga and learning about like, well, life is worth living. And we might not understand why things happen, that there's a greater reason, and that God will continue to, the universe or whatever you believe, like, will continue to help us and support us and carry us through our way on the way. And when I started to tap into that faith and trust that things would work out, I started to see how amazing life really is. So as a reminder, when I get into those lows about it's a great day to be alive, I try to look for something positive in every day, even though it's really hard. Especially with the current pandemic where things can kind of look a little glim. Well, how can you be present and how can you appreciate what you have now and not worrying about what's going to happen in a month from now or, a year from now? Let's just focus on what we can do now and be grateful for what that is and what that means. So I think about that often because it's easy to slip back or start to get down on ourselves or feel bad. And it's like, no, there's so much. And you are capable and you are limitless and you can really do anything that you put your mind to. And even if you can't in this moment do some of those things because of restrictions or whatever it may be, that there is time that this is just, one little bump along the way and that we will come out stronger on the other side. We just got to continue to have faith and trust, that things will be okay.
Oh, Keri, I don't think that you could have done this without having a pretty good team of supporters. Who around you helped you with, 7 marathons and has helped you with everything else?
Oh, absolutely. My husband, if it wasn't for my amazing husband, I wouldn't be able to do this. He's gotten used to me by now. When I first told him I wanted to do the World Marathon Challenge, he was like, no. And then he's like, really? And he's like, okay, we'll figure it out and we'll make it work. It's kind of funny. So now nothing really surprises him, but he's always on board. He always has my back. He's my rock. He's amazing. And, he puts up with me during those long workouts or if I'm tired or cranky, and he always feeds me well and makes sure that I'm properly hydrated. So certainly I couldn't do without him. I have an amazing coach, Chris Draper from Draper Training and Nutrition. He's amazing. He is an endurance athlete, triathlete. He was even big into strength training and powerlifting. So he's just been incredible, and he certainly has helped me physically and mentally, with that. I have from my sports med doc, who was amazing, to my massage therapist, to my acupuncturist. It's like a team. Everybody makes sure that my body's in tip-top shape and that I'm feeling good and I'm prepared. So it's certainly, and of course, the rest of my family, my friends who are tolerant of me, and when I get a little cranky after workouts. So the people around me are just, I feel blessed. I feel blessed that I was able to do something like this. And I have wonderful staff at the yoga studio who will hold down the fort while I was running the world. So it's everybody. I feel really grateful that I have a wonderful support system and tons of wonderful people.
Well, Keri, it's been so great talking to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Subscribe to the Providence College podcast in all the usual places, including Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play, and Spotify. If you like what you hear, please review and share with others. Thanks for listening, and go Friars.